So, I was gonna make these videos over a series of days, but now I'm hot for the idea and I don't want to end it. So I'm going on with the third one. So the third one, no, the fourth one. Yes, because I did Jim Morrison, I did Dylan, and then I did The Godfather. This is the fourth one. And the fourth one might come again as a surprise. Now, going back to music album here. And this album is huge for me, and maybe even in some respects, because I found it earlier, is even bigger than Bob Dylan's debut album, Bob Dylan. This album is called Nirvana Bleach. Again, we get now with Nirvana's Bleach. Again, we get the debut work of an artist. And why am I mentioning Bleach instead of Nevermind, which everyone knows is the most famous Nirvana album? Well, there's a reason for that. Number one, just like I said in the Dylan video, the thing I like is when I see a hungry artist, because I can relate with the hungry artist. Perhaps I'll spend my whole sad fucking life as a hungry guy. The fact is that with this album, we see Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic, I believe, and maybe a different drummer, or I don't remember. I know that the lineup of the band changed after this album. And that some guys, and I always thought this was so crazy, some guys who were on this album were gone from Nirvana by the time they went big. Like they ditched out of the band. They said, "We're out, man. We're out, Kurt. We don't want to be in the band anymore. Fuck this band. It's going nowhere." And then he comes out with the second album, and bada bing, bada boom, it's the biggest thing in the world. As everybody knows, it's a piece of music history now. And what happens after that is everyone says, "Well, we want to know what these guys were doing before Nevermind." And I was one of those guys. And I picked up Bleach when I went onto my big Nirvana craze, which I had again. We're going back now. Remember that. These are all things that I would have liked when I was relatively young. And and I said, "Well, I got to get every Nirvana album." So I probably at that point had Nevermind. And then I got In Utero, and then there was Incesticide. There was From the Muddy Banks of the Wishka. Um, and there might have even been another one, I can't remember. And then I went and picked up the first one, Bleach, which has this awesome cover of Kurt Cobain just walking like this with a black jacket on and the long hair. And the long hair for me was so cool. I mean, that guy looked so fucking cool in some of those pictures. Um, these days, I don't fancy his music as much, but I still know all the songs by heart. Anybody who knew me in middle school knows how much I loved those albums. They were the first ones, and one of the biggest reasons that Nirvana was so big for me, again, wasn't just because of Nirvana standalone, was because of what Nirvana led me to later on down the line. You see, guys, that's how I judge these things. If it didn't lead me to anything, I say it's a piece of crap. If it led me to something, for instance, Blink 182 never led me to a goddamn thing. So to me, they're pieces of crap. I like some of the songs, but they're not the best to say they're pieces of crap. I don't want to be mean. They're a good band, but they never led me to anything. The things that I call big bangs are when other universes spin out wildly from all around them. For instance, if you're running through a book series of 8 books, you read the first book, and then obviously, very quick and in quick succession, if you like the first book, hey man, you just got 7 more books that you know you're gonna probably like that you can read through. This is really cool. You know that you're gonna have a good time. It's like watching a television series, right? You tune in on the first week, you love it, and you know every week at that 1 hour you're gonna have a good fucking time because that's when that television series plays. So it's like easy instant gratification. And for me, that's what I love, and that's what the most influential work is. So with this Bleach album, I got led to all this other cool stuff because what do you know? I went and picked up a book about Kurt Cobain. I wanted to learn about him. I wanted to learn where his influences had come from. And I came to find out about bands with crazy names, bands I had never heard about before and never would have heard about had I never picked up this book. And those bands had names like Black Flag and Screeching Weasel and Mudhoney, various Seattle grunge bands from the Seattle grunge era. Of course, I found out about Cobain's wife, Courtney Love, with Hole, and she had a solo band, and she was pretty cool in her own right. despite the controversy around her. I found out that Kurt Cobain was really into the Beatles. In fact, the song About a Girl by Nirvana was basically written after Kurt went on a Beatles binge. And the Beatles are written all over that band. In fact, I was writing to my cousin recently, and I made a point to inform him that Nirvana really is just like the Beatles, um, distorted and angry in a way, because Kurt was very influenced by the Beatles. He was a child who was born in the 60s. A lot of people forget that now, but I do believe that he was born in like 65 or 66 or something. It seems strange because we identify him so much, even with this generation, as a young man. And it seems like he would fit right in with this internet era, but Mr. Cobain never used a computer, probably, which is really, really strange to think about because he's all over the place to this day. He's obviously a titan of youth culture, especially modern youth culture, especially when it comes to rock and roll. And, a lot of people do argue that Kurt Cobain kept rock and roll alive at that time, because at that time, what I remember I found out when I read this book was, and I never forgot this information, was that Cobain was kind of battling the 80s. A lot of rock historians were taking the trail, we're going away from Nirvana because all the best bands do that. You see, my friends, I can't stress that enough. The best things, the best pieces of art always lead you to something else. If it's not leading you to something else, get the fuck away from it. That's my advice. If an artist isn't leading you and tossing you in the direction of another artist or someone else, get the fuck away from them, because that is no good. Okay? I don't think that's any good. I think that you should be getting led in a million directions all the time. The world should always be building and building and building and growing one on top of the other, one on top of the other. And once that goes away, I say, fuck it, man, get rid of it. Okay? That's what I say, to put it bluntly. So, with this, I can't even remember what the hell I was saying now. I can't even remember because I went off my little rant. But what on earth was I saying? I don't remember. No one's there to tell me. But you know, back to the main moral was Bleach was really just that big of a deal, and it led me to all these punk rock bands. And when I found these punk rock bands, I saw for the first time that it was possible for a regular person to create rock and roll. And that was big because we have to remember that by the time I was coming up, by the time most of my viewers are probably coming up, mostly anyone around here these days coming up, it seems like rock and roll and music and art and all this stuff is stuff for bigwigs. It seems so out of reach of the normal person to conquer or achieve anything in these fields. And it is really hard. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying it's not. But the fact is, uh, Black Flag and Screeching Weasel and these punk bands, these early punk bands, even the Sex Pistols or the Clash or Patti Smith, Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground. I never would have found any of these cats had I not read the book about Cobain. Cobain led me to all these people. Once I read that book, a floodgate got burst open, and I found all of this stuff about all of this punk rock culture, which was just like insane because the punk rock culture is a whole other culture to enter into. Oh, and what Cobain was doing, I remember now, he was battling with the 80s rock bands. You see, a lot of rock historians forget, but in the 80s, because we look at the 60s bands, we look at the 50s bands, we look at the 70s guys, like the Southern rock and everything like that, and we just totally forget the disaster that was the 80s. And in fact, I've never been, at least I do, I've never been the biggest fan of the 80s rock bands. And I think it's kind of embarrassing. Motley Crue, Van Halen, all these, all those, Motley Crue and Van Halen, I suppose, really stick out to me. Oh, and Def Leppard. This is when rock took on like the popular, which it's strange to look back to now, especially for my generation. I maybe some people that frequent this channel of mine won't know because you guys are older than me, I know. But rock was like the thing that the jocks listened to apparently in the 80s, and Cobain grew up with that and despised it. So he took rock back, and he wanted to get rid of the really long, meandering, advanced, and complex solos that guys like Van Halen did. Because if you listen to Van Halen solos, like truth be told, I could never play one of those to this day. I was never able to figure that out. But I can play the Nirvana songs, which to me are just as good. And I can play a lot of other stuff too. I can play a lot of solos, but I was never really able to do that Van Halen style thing. And Nirvana teaches you that that doesn't matter. That's the best thing about it. It's kind of like that famous Picasso quote. It took me 5 years to learn how to paint like Leonardo da Vinci. It took me a lifetime to learn how to paint like a child. It does go back to that. Kurt Cobain, whether or not he even realized it consciously himself, was very much utilizing Picasso's awesome advice. So that is this video. I'll wrap it up now because I had promised myself that I wouldn't go over 10 minutes for each. So we're out now. So the first thing was Wilderness by Jim Morrison. The second thing was Bob Dylan by Bob Dylan. The third thing was The Godfather. And this is the fourth video now, and it's Nirvana's first debut album called Bleach.